great fun doing it, and you know, we then went to all those places in France. I
In
mean,
the name of research,
in the
right?
name of research, such terrible places like Champagne,
Where
we
you
went,
had to drink.
where we went to Epernay and went down into the caves of Moët Chandon. And of course, we had to sample the produce.
Does being a writer give you a little bit of a cachet when you go places? Do they actually welcome you in and hand you
Oh
a
yeah,
glass and all that?
certainly in France, writers are revered in a way that they're not, I don't think, in British or American society.
Well, in Britain, they hold crime writers in contempt, actually.
Well, yes.
So that must be a dramatic difference for
It's
you.
true. Oh yeah. I mean, crime writing, polars, they call crime books in France, are very highly regarded as you know, literature.
They have a lot of literary festivals in France. In fact, you're going to one in Cognac. Poor you, having to go and drink cognac. But I also thought it was interesting that Elle magazine has nominated your first Chinese book, which in French is called Les Meurtres Pékins, right? Which is basically the Peking murders.
That's right, yes.
But they nominated it for a literary prize, which I thought was way cool.
Yeah, it was fantastic. The
Comes with money, or does it come with something?
Yeah, there's a financial prize, and you get to meet les lectrices de Elle. I went to Paris and I met all the juries of readers, and there's 100 of them. A lot of very glamorous women, of course.
Well, sure, because Elle is the French equivalent of Vogue.
Yeah, that's right. And what was funny was, because I wore my kilt to go to that, and I think I was the only person there in a skirt, you know.
Flashing your knees.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, I would like to add that Extraordinary People had that particular design, but your second book, which we've just accepted and which will publish, we hope, either in the fall of 2007 or the spring of 2008, is totally different.
Completely
and in fact, it really is driven by a missing wine critic, another person who has disappeared.
Yeah.
And I think it's a wonderful hook upon which you can hang a real exploration of not just an unusual part of France for wine, one we don't know, but you can also explore how much money hangs on reviews and wine critics, you know, what they say has a way disproportional effect on how wines are sold. And you do again come back to that same question of who shall govern the governors. If you've got a wine critic on the take, or, you know, arrogant or influenced by some factor or something, he can trash a successful winery, or he can make an unsuccessful winery. Who's going to do something about that?
Yeah, it's an extraordinary phenomenon, really. When I started exploring the whole thing, I looked at the way, for example, Robert Parker would rate wines. I mean, he is, I think everybody accepts, the king of wine, the emperor of wine, and that his palate determines what wines are going to be the best-selling wines, not just in the United States, but around the world. And he's very fond of Bordeaux and Rhone wines, and I mean, the wines that he rates at the highest level end up costing, you know, $200 and $300 a bottle.
Right.
And the irony of that is that he set out to be the people's champion, to provide ordinary people who like to drink wine with a kind of guide as to what was good and what wasn't. But of course, he became so well known that when he said a wine was good, the price of it shot up so high, ordinary people could no longer afford to buy it. So there's a kind of inbuilt irony in that is
there really is. I know there's Oz Clarke and there's other people, but you're right. Parker is probably still. This is not to confuse him with Robert B. Parker, the mystery writer. I've always thought it'd be fun to do an event for Robert Parker and Robert B. Parker, but Robert B. Parker is a beer guy, so I'm not sure how that would work. But anyway, what is the region in France? Because I think it's a fascinating one. I'm not particularly familiar with it.
It's called Gaillac, which is spelled G-A-I-L-L-A-C, and it's in the southwest. It's about 2 hours south of where I live. And it's upriver, literally upriver from Bordeaux, inland quite a way. And in the old days, I mean, they've been making wine there since before Roman times. And in fact, when you drive around Gaiac, you can just imagine that. In fact, it hasn't really changed much in 2,000 years. The landscape, the countryside, the vineyards, the old stone houses, you could just see the guys in skirts and sandals marching up the road. It's really evocative. But the way they got their wines out to the rest of the world traditionally was they would ship them down the River Tarn, which feeds out to Bordeaux. And that's why vineyards in those days were always built around rivers, because that was the only way you could move stuff around. But of course, the Bordelais were making their own wine, and they didn't like the competition. And the wines from Gaiac had to come through Bordeaux, had to come through the ports there. So the Bordelais imposed taxes on the wines from Gaiac. They built barriers across the river and forced them to pay to get round the barriers. So they did absolutely everything they could to throttle the trade of the Gaiac wines, and in the end really succeeded, which is why today people in America, for example, know what Bordeaux wines are, but have never heard of Gaiac wines. And even in France, a lot of people have never heard or even tasted Gaiac wines. But there was a time, maybe 200-300 years ago, when the royal households of Europe drank Gaiac wine. It was their favourite. And in the last 20 to 30 years, there's been a real renaissance there in winemaking. And they're now producing wines which, in my opinion, certainly rival the second growth Bordeaux wines that you might pay $60, $70, $80 a bottle for, but you can get in Gaiac for about $8 to $10. And is just as good and quite often better.
Of course, you realize that if you, in fact, get the critic the title of the second book to Robert Parker to read and for a quote, and he takes an interest, that there goes the cheap wine in Gaiac. I mean, truly,
Yeah.
It'll be the same mechanism. You know, if he then says, oops, I've missed this, and starts to do something with it, the prices there will go up. But there's so much money involved for the producing vineyards and for the distributors and all. I think it's a wonderful topic for a book. And if we're clever, and you can get Gaiac, if you can get some imported into the United States, think of how much fun we could have offering the book and the wine as a package.
Well, that's a really good idea for the promotion. I'd love to do that, yeah.
I do it too.
A reading from the book and a tasting of the wines that are written about it. Yeah.
Everybody will love the book after the second glass. And we'll hardly I think it's great. And then we'll have 5 more crimes, 5 crimes to go. So I think it's really going to be a lovely odyssey. Well, we only have a few minutes left because we've been having so much fun in France, but we ought to talk about your other series. This set of books about Leon and Margaret Campbell, of which there are 6, were published in England starting in the 90s, right?
I think the first one came out in '99, yeah.
Right, and so of course I'd read them all and met you in England. In fact, we met in Manchester, just to prove how international we both are, in a hotel. And I recognized you from your photograph on the back of one of your British editions. I know, here's poor Peter coming down the escalator, and this weird woman is going, oh, Peter May. It was great. But anyway, finally, they made it to America, and the Firemaker came out last year, the first one, and then your new one, The Fourth Sacrifice, is the yellow one, has just come out. What's the sequence? I mean, did you have an overall design?
I didn't know. The first book was supposed to be a one-off, and then, as I say, I got offered this book contract to carry on with the same characters, and so it kind of grew. And in a way, the series is built around the relationship between the Chinese cop and the American female pathologist. And who are, in a sense, metaphors for their respective countries, and the kind of clash of culture and identity and personality that exists between China and America, exists between these two characters. So that it was an opportunity to give expression to those differences and explore the conflicts.
In Firemaker, if I remember right, you had a strain of genetically altered rice.
That's correct.
Which was kind of like the money motive, or potentially the money motive, in the book.
That's right, yeah.
This is all stuff you don't know a whole lot about. You don't know a lot about being a female forensic from Chicago, or a Chinese policeman, or, in fact, you're not a biologist.
This is true. But I've done, I mean, started out life as a journalist in Scotland for 8 years, and so the one thing I learned above all as a journalist was how to research a subject that I started off knowing nothing about.